I don't know if you guys will be able to tell, but I am really excited because it's time for a little bit more toy photography. I'm going to be getting some of my Lego down off the shelf because I've got a really cool technique to show you guys, which involves getting explosions into the background of my toy photography scenes. I'm going to go and get started, so I'll see you in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux, and today we are shooting more Lego, which makes me really excited. And in a moment I'm going to be getting some of my Lego buildings down from my shelves here because we're going to be creating a scene using those and using some explosions. Now, we're not using real explosions, and I'll talk about my reasoning for that in a moment, but I do have this really cool technique that allows us to get realistic looking explosions in the backgrounds of scenes without using any pyrotechnics, without using any Photoshop. It's a technique that I've used before. Last time I did it using some Warhammer figurines. I really liked the effect. I wasn't totally happy with the images overall, and this was before the time of me making YouTube videos for you guys, so I really wanted to show this technique off so that you guys can try and recreate it as well. I'm going to go and grab some of my Lego down off my shelf and set up a nice little scene. So I've got my modular buildings here. This is going to be the street scene in the background of my shot. So all of this will be out of focus in the background with my fire effect as well. So you don't need anything quite as elaborate as this. It will all be out of focus. So you can use a plain background and still get that fire effect if you wanted to. This just adds a little bit more believability to the shot overall. It also makes things a little bit trickier, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Over here I've got my camera sat on a tripod. Setting up on a tripod is far preferable for this type of work than going freehand. If you're going freehand and trying to build an elaborate scene like this, you'll be picking up the camera and putting it down and recomposing, refocusing all of the time, whereas having your camera stationary and steady means that you can build the scene in front of the lens without having to think about all of that every single time you make a change. The last thing that I do need is some lighting. So I've got my mini tripod here ready to hold my Adaptalux Studio, which can hold 5 lighting arms at once. And I think this is possibly one of the first times in a tutorial that I'm going to use every single port, and that we're going to need to use every single port because we've got lots of lighting arms. I've got 2 red lighting arms here, an amber and 2 white lighting arms. So we're going to make use of all of those to really build a very elaborate lighting setup to get that believability of our explosion going off. Explosions are quite complicated when it comes to lighting, and we also need to think about making sure that you can still see the foreground subject, making sure there's a little bit of different coloured light in the background. So I'll be setting all of this up and I'll show you that elaborate setup in just a moment. So I think I'm happy with this angle for now. I've got my firefighter over here climbing up the side of a building, looking off to the side, which is important so that she's looking into the lens and she's looking a little bit worried. So I've chosen an expression for her. I've chosen a head that looks a little bit concerned, which I think will add to the drama of the image. More importantly, we have our background. So over at the back here, we've got another building, and I've actually taken one of the windows out from the side of the building because I want to replace that with some fire. The way that we're going to make our fire is using tinfoil. Tinfoil is really nice and reflective. So if I grab just a small piece here and start to screw it up into a much smaller ball or a different shape, you'll notice that all of these little reflective areas are pointing in different directions. When we light this tinfoil with some red and some orange light, all of those little reflective surfaces are going to shine the light back at us in different ways. This creates a little bit of variance in the background and a little bit of bokeh as well. So as long as our tinfoil is out of focus in the background of the shot and lit with some red and orange light, it's going to hopefully look a little bit like explosions and fire. Now, it's been a little while since I've used this this effect, so your guess is as good as mine as to how it will turn out. We only start to see the effect when we set up our lighting. So that's my next job. I'm going to grab my Adaptalux Studio, start plugging in some lighting arms, and see if I can't start to build this effect in the background of my image. So you'll notice that my scene has slightly changed. I changed my female firefighter over to a male one because the only scared face that I've got is actually a female face. So I've changed the firefighter to be more determined, and the damsel in distress is hanging out the window. Makes for a little bit more of an interesting foreground, I think. But the lighting here is what's really interesting. So lighting the front of my foreground, my two people, I've got two white lighting arms. So one's coming over here, lighting my damsel, and then underneath my firefighter's helmet and underneath the hair of my damsel was a big shadow, so I wanted to bring an extra light in here, which is just reflecting off the white table and just adding an extra little bit of white fill light onto the front of the building and my two characters. Back here is where the magic happens though. So I've got my tinfoil coming out of one of these little windows here, and I've got two lighting arms pointed directly at that tinfoil. This here is a red lighting arm coming in and lighting the fire red, and then I've got an amber lighting arm coming in down here and lighting the fire yellow. I then have a third red lighting arm, so this lighting arm is coming down here and pointing at the back of my firefighter. This is because this fire is going to be the source of the light back here. There's no other light, and because that fire should be creating light and sending it this way, it should be shining on the back of our firefighter. So this red lighting is giving a little bit of red rim lighting on the back of my firefighter, which is noticeable, and on the ladder and on the side of the building. So that one is important, pointing the light back towards you. So altogether, that's 5 lighting arms to create quite an elaborate lighting setup, but I think it's going to look really nice on the back of the camera. So with my video lights back on, you can see this setup in all of its octopusy glory, and I've used just about every feature of the Adaptalux Studio to get this setup happening. It's a very elaborate setup, it's very delicate. It's about a couple of hours worth of fiddling around with the angle of my camera and my settings, the angle of my whole scene, and of course the placement and balance of my lighting arms themselves. The lighting arms are balanced in such a way that the tinfoil at the back is overexposed. That's really important. This needs to be as overexposed as possible so that you can get that bokeh, that fire. It should be really bright in comparison to everything else. So don't be afraid of overexposing your background, your fire, in order to get that effect. It doesn't look quite as good if everything is properly balanced. So the way that I did that with these two white lighting arms at the front is turn them all the way down. These guys are only at about 5% brightness, these two white ones, whereas the reds and the oranges at the back are on full power. So our fire, how do we create it using our tinfoil? Well, I did screw up my screwing up of the tinfoil in a couple of ways. It's very important to get the shape of fire, so a little curve with sort of the smoke effect going up, but it's also important to not screw your tinfoil up too much. It's very tempting to compact it all down into a very tight little shape, but what that does is make it less reflective. All of the surfaces become very, very small on here. So the fire that I've ended up with is actually a very loose shape, so this isn't very compacted at all. So grabbing a piece of tinfoil, most tinfoil will have two sides. Make sure to use the shiny side outward, and you need to just very, very lightly start to crumple it. stop occasionally and try it out with your lighting if you've already got that set up at this point. If not, you'll just have to crumple it a little bit and then take a look when you've got your lighting set up. Crumple it a little bit more if it's looking not quite like fire. If you can still tell that it's tinfoil, it's not screwed up enough. If it just looks like a bundle of red and orange light, then it's too screwed up. What you need to have is some quite large surfaces pointing in all of the different directions. That's what's going to really catch that light and point it back at you with the different colors of light. So it's the mix of red and orange light that really sells this as fire or an explosion. So try screwing up just a little bit, screw it a little bit more until you're really happy with that effect. Now this works in combination with the depth of field of your shot. So the more out of focus your tinfoil is, the bigger those bokeh balls are going to be, and you need to find the balance between it being too out of focus and it just looking like a big red ball, and being too in focus where you can still see that it is tinfoil. There is a healthy balance there in the middle somewhere. I think I found it for this shot, but I'm probably still going to be playing around with this for a little while until I'm happy with it. When it comes to our depth of field, there is that element of the foreground to think about as well. One of the things that I was unhappy with my Warhammer 40k shots was that the foreground wasn't sharp enough. You could still see that really shallow depth of field in all of the characters in the foreground. This is where my focus stacking is going to come into play with this shot. I want to focus stack those two guys at the front, but no further back. So my focus stack will stop at the edge of the building, leaving all of that fire in the background as out of focus as possible. All of this is going to come together to create a single shot captured in camera that doesn't require any Photoshop to create that fire effect in the background, and it should just be straight out of the camera with a really cool fire effect. Hopefully it turns out as striking as it is in my head. So one of the comments that we get on Lego videos like this and effects videos is, why not just do it in Photoshop? And that is a valid question. If you are a Photoshop whiz, by all means, go and do this in Photoshop. You can probably composite this or use some effects to build a shot like this in no time if you're an expert in Photoshop. However, I really enjoy the process of building, constructing an image in front of the lens. I enjoy the challenge of trying to do all of this using practical effects and practical lighting. It's just the way that I enjoy to photograph, and I really enjoy using light. I think it's great practice to figure out ways to position all of these lighting arms. I think it's great practice to figure out how light interacts with your scene, and all of this can be massively scaled up to full-size sets. So if you have great dreams of going and working on movie sets or something like that, the placement of these lights will be exactly the same on a larger set. Lighting the front of people's faces, lighting the background separately, and casting light back towards the actors, all of that still applies, just in a much larger scale. So I think there's a lot to be said for trying to light scenes like this, even though it might be a little bit more time consuming and certainly a lot fiddlier than doing it in Photoshop. It's very rewarding and extremely satisfying when you get the result that was in your head at the beginning. I'm 99% of the way there to creating that image that I will set out to create, but I am going to turn off my video lights again and try and fiddle around with this a little bit more. I'd like to know down in the comments whether or not you want to see more Lego photography like this, more elaborate setups of the Adaptalux studio, and more toy photography in general. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and hit the subscribe button if you want to see more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration right here on the channel. For now though guys, that is all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.